Thank you to our sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Build accessible, powerful WordPress forms with Gravity Forms. Flexible tools for creators, developers, and teams of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, Woo. WooCommerce is the open-source e-commerce platform built on WordPress, helping merchants worldwide sell, manage, and grow their businesses. Gold sponsors, Ally Web Accessibility. Equalize Digital, websites for everyone. GoDaddy, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Yoast. Silver sponsors, Aardvark, CodeGeek, Your Vision, Our Talent, One Team, Kinetic Iris, Kinsta, Pressable, Second Melody. Bronze sponsors, Nine Planets Hosting, Engage, Draw Attention, Multidots, NerdPress, OSAM Studio, AusEY, Australian Web Accessibility Initiative, Progress Planner, Quality Logic, Sharp, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Stellar WP, Termageddon, WebYes.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2025. My name is Annabelle Drum, and I'm a knitwear designer with Drumroll Knitwear. Thank you for joining us for the presentation Making Gutenberg Blocks Accessible, Practical Techniques with AI and Dev Tools with Anam Hossain. Anam is a senior WordPress engineer at Multidots, a WordPress VIP agency with over 9 years of experience building custom themes, plugins, and enterprise-level WordPress solutions. He specializes in Gutenberg block development, accessibility-first design, and performance optimization with a strong focus on creating user-friendly interfaces using React. Anam is passionate about building inclusive digital experiences and advocates for embedding accessibility into every stage of the development process. He also explores how AI-powered tools can enhance accessibility workflows and help developers deliver more usable and equitable web solutions. Please feel free to add your questions to the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect to other attendees. Welcome, Anam.
Hi, I'm Anam, and today I'm going to talk about making Gutenberg block accessible. So in this session, I will share some practical tips and techniques with DevTools and AI. So let's get started. So why at first I wanted to say that why accessibility matters. So when we come into tell about why accessibility matters, so we are actually not just thinking about the people with disabilities. We are also thinking about better usability for all users. So around 15% of global population lives with some form of disabilities. So accessibility is also about compliance with standards like WCAG and ADA. And most importantly, it is actually creating some inclusive experience. So good accessibility, that means good usability. So apart from that, when we are actually coming to the people, so it is not just about the code, it actually caring about the people. And when you are actually or your site is good at accessible level, so then you are actually good in business. So improve your site SEO, and you reach or to the more audience, you actually reduce your site legal risk, because in USA or there are some legal issue regarding the accessibility. So you reduce some sort of I can say legal risk. And at last I can say, at last but not least, actually I can say, accessibility is all about mindset. It's not about the task. So when you are actually having accessibility in your mindset as a developer, when you are writing your code, so when you are writing in a div, actually you are you can think about, should I write div or should I write button, because the functionality of this section of this element will be button. So instead of writing div, we can actually writing some button. So when we are actually adding some image, then I can then at that level, so when you are when you are actually keep accessibility in your minds, and then you must add some alternative text that describe that image properly. So it's all about, actually I can say, from the developer perspective, I can say it's all, accessibility is something like mindset. It's not about the task. So when you are actually writing your code day-to-day basis, so you are actually writing accessible code when accessibility in your mindset. So I can say from the developer perspective, it's your mindset. You can set your mindset as accessible, so that you can write your code mostly accessible way. So let me introduce myself. I am Anam. I am a senior WordPress engineer at Multidots, which is WordPress VIP agency. So I have been building custom solution for more than 9.5 years. So most of the case, I write some Gutenberg block, some with more accessible way. So in this session, I will share some more accessible way or more practical tips and techniques regarding the Gutenberg blocks, and some sort of like how accessibility can improve, or how these things needed to be tested, or how these things needed to be implemented. So let's get started. So in this session, I will cover some sort of like semantic HTML and area roles, how area roles can be implemented, or what is the main purpose of area roles, and keyboard accessibility. Um, because few of the people are actually navigate through the keyboard, like they can navigate, or your site can be navigate order by order through the keyboard accessibility, and some color contrast issue. So if your audience, or if your site visitor having some color blindness or color issue, then your site, uh, or when you are developing your site, or when you are designing your site, you must keep this color contrast issue in your mind, because if you choose some wrong color for wrong people, then they might not get interested for your website. So you must keep color contrast issue when you are actually building or developing your site or designing your site. Then the next thing is alternative text. So alternative text is also the same level important as the color contrast issue, because it actually describe the image issue for the screen readers. So when any screen reader came to your image, and they actually, it described the image in the text level. So it is also important, so a user can, or visitor can get some idea for your image. The next topic is DevTools. DevTools is also important for the developer perspective. So how DevTools can be used to maintain accessible things, and AI can be used in DevTools. I will cover these things in my session. So let's get to the next session. Sorry, next topic. The first thing first, which is semantic HTML, which is the most important part, I can say. Most people are actually ignore this part, because they focusing about the design, not focusing about the markup. So when you are actually focusing about the markup, you are having some SEO. Like at that time, you are actually focusing the SEO, and focusing the more, actually more markup, or more or markup can be improved, how the markup can be improved with the semantic HTML. So it actually um, meaning that putting or put the right things in the right place. So when you are actually writing like the div or something like that, when you are actually developing any page with the coding level, so instead of writing div for your header, writing div for your navigation, writing div for your button, then you can actually think about this, like for the header it can be header, for the navigation if you are actually using writing navigation, then it can be navigation, or you are actually writing some button, then instead of div you can actually use button. So it's this, in this way you can actually differentiate right markup or semantic HTML instead of div. And the next thing is like choose your heading logically. So all the heading in your page not for the same importance or same priority. So you should use H1 for the most important title, then H2, then H3, then H4, then H5, then H6. So you need to choose your heading logically. And sorry, so avoid the deep soup. So most people, or few of the developer, or some sort of like developer use uh, div most of the places. So avoid use div most of the places. There are some most HTML element in there, like aside, like footer, like main article. So you can use those type of element instead of div. This is the common simple example of uh, good of I can say the template part of the theme. So here header is actually, we can use header instead of div. We can use navigation for, so if you are actually using navigation, then you can use nav, then footer for the site footer. So these are the things you can actually implement as a semantic HTML instead of div or some sort of other things. So put the right things into the right place, then it will improve automatically. Okay, the next thing is area. The area means accessible rich internet application. So it defined the most important part. Which part define which part? So if you define any place, or if you define any area as a navigation, then it can be count as a navigation. If you define any area as a main, then it will be count as a main content of the page. So you need to set your area label or area role accordingly. So don't overuse it, but you need to set these things uh, clearly. For example, if I, sorry, for example, if I go into the area, so how the area can be described, this is the navigation. So instead of div, we can use nav, and this is the label. So we can use this label as a main navigation, and then we don't have any such uh, element for in HTML. So we can use div and set the role and the label. So for the site search, then in the main content, we can set the role as a main content. So in this way, we can actually use the area label and area role, and we can go into the code for more explore. I can say this is one of the, not this one, yeah, this one. So in this section, or in this page, this is some sort of like tab functionality. I can say here it is like I can, if I go into the English American, so the respective things will show the respective category. So these are the category of this site, and respective post will be assigned to the respective category. So if I open the code of this section, save.js, so here you can notice, which is like this one. In here, this nav will represent this one. So in nav, I can say the area label I actually define, which is the category tabs. So if I define something else, then it will define like what is the main purpose of this nav. So in this way, we can actually define the area of that specific section. And when it is come to the content, which is like this part, so this here is something like area hidden. So right now the classic part, classic category post is visible, but rest of the things, rest of the category post is hidden. So we can set like this way: area expanded or area hidden, then area labeled by. So we can add these sort of things into our block level to describe properly what area is responsible for what things. Is it hidden or is it expanded, some sort of like that. And some important tips for the developer, which is like, at first you think HTML5 tag first, which is a schema markup. If anything is not covered by the HTML tag, then something like this. So if for the search, this is not actually, there is no HTML5 element for the search. So you should use area label in this case. So don't overuse the area label, but you can use area landmark when it is necessary. So if anything is described, you can use area label or area label by to clarify the purpose. And of course, when it is finished, then test the accessibility checker to test your plugin or test your theme functionality. So yeah, this is the area part, I can say. And the most the another important thing, which is like keyboard accessibility. So when you are actually developing any block in Gutenberg, then keyboard accessibility might comes into play, or might be I can say challenging part in some cases. But in some cases it is not challenging, but in some cases it is also uh, challenging, I can say. When you are actually creating some complex, then the tab functionality, then the click functionality. The tab functionality is by default, you can actually go through the tab, but when you are actually adding some next and right button in your keyboard, then it is you need some more functionality. So I can say the all interactive element in your block must be accessible via the keyboard navigation. So user should be able to navigate through your blocks using the tab key or interact with the element using the enter and space. Uh, when you are actually having some button in your block, you can actually do so like this way. On key down, when either it is enter, either it is space, you can write your function like this way. And let me demonstrate how these things can be done. So here I click in here. So if I press the tab, it is actually navigate through one by one. But then if I click on this one, then if I hit tab, and now I'm pressing next and right button, next and previous keyboard on my keyboard. So see, this is actually click, I'm going through the next button and going through the previous button. So when I choose any category through the next and right, sorry, next and previous, and hit enter, then selected category will be shown. Crime, press enter. Fiction, press enter. French, press enter. Nature, press enter. If I go to fiction again and press space, then it is also visible. Crime, press crime. Love, press space. Classic, press space, then it is also visible. And then if I press tab again, then it will go through the next and right. Or if I press any next or previous button, then it will go through the next thing, and then it will focus to the next highlightable area, which is anchor in this case. So in this way, keyboard accessible is actually needed. Okay, so let's go into the code part of this section, which is vue.js. Yeah, so at last of this page, which is like key down. When you are actually pressing the key down, there is a way to check if it is arrow right, which is the right key of your keyboard, then this functionality will be execute, and when it is left, then this functionality will be execute. Then there are some other things which is like press enter and press space, and this functionality is activate some sort of like adding some console log for the debugging purpose, adding some attributes, hidden and true, expanded hidden and true. So these things also needed to be implemented. So if anything is hidden or any area is hidden, then you need to be add hidden or expanded in this way. So these sort of things are needed to be implemented through the keyboard. If I go into the another post, which is this one, so I can say the full things are actually in one thing, one card. So you can count as a card or postcard. So if I click in here and press tab, then the entire things are actually selected. See, the entire things are selected, and if I press enter, then it actually go into the respective post. See, if I click enter, then it will go into the respective category or respective post. So this sort of keyboard functionality is needed for your site. Then alternative text. So when any image is shown in your blog, then you must add alternative text for your for that image. So it actually in this way you are actually giving more context to the user, like this image is actually described this text. So screen reader text or screen reader user can get more idea once you are actually providing some alternative text to the image. So if you are having some decorative image, some sort of like background image, if you are having some icon, or if you are having some background image, then you don't need to provide some description to that decorative image, because that is not important. So you should provide some important image. You should provide some alternative text to some important image. For example, uh, when you are actually developing something in this code example here, which is like src, which is having some URL, alternative text, which is having some alt text that is coming from attributes. So if in the block, if you are actually give user to add some attribute or alternative text, then in this way we can actually get that alternative text from the attributes. So let's get into the code to having some attributes. Here it is. If I open the Chrome Dev Tools, yes, here. So image, here it is like alternative text. So this image, when we are actually coming through the tab in the or since this is not actually implemented, so since this image is not actually selected, but I add some alternative text, I can add some keyboard navigation here. So but right now it is not implemented, but you can actually add this sort of functionality for the good practice. And when it come to the code, here it is. So here the src, which is the featured image URL, and then alternative text. So alternative text is coming from here, post data embedded, and then featured media, and then alt text, which is coming from the REST API. And if the featured image text is not provided, then I am adding some fallback message, which is like featured image for this title. If anything is not provided, then it will be shown in here. So in this way, we can actually provide some alternative text. If any featured image is not provided, then we can add some fallback here, like no featured image found. Okay, so in this way we can actually add some alternative text. And here, since this is the most important things, like this is the card, but the card is totally selected, but the image is not selected. So this is also we need to add some alternative text. So since this is implemented, we can open the featured image. Here it is. So this is the alternative text. So we can also add some here. In this way, we can add some alternative text. Then we go into the color contrast issue. So ensure that the text and interactive elements have some sufficient color contrast issue. So it needs to be WCAG 2.1 AA actually standard, and the right ratio for these things, which is like 4.5:1. So the normal text and the large text will be 3:1. So let's go into the another things, which is like if we give our user or give the user of the block to the ability to set the color contrast things, then we can do like this way. This is the color settings. User can change the color, text color. User can change the background color. So if anything is having some color contrast issue, so these things might be helpful. And now if I go into this block, so I can check the color contrast issue of this, I can say the label. So here I open a tool to check the color contrast issue. So right now I am checking the tools, checking the color contrast issue of this text. So right now these things, which is here, the color of this section is here. If I choose the text color, this is the text color, and the background is FFF. So see, this is small text, but the large text is good. But for the small text, it is not enough. So we need to change. If I change it to the more deeper or more contrast, more black, then it will give you the good result. So if I choose the color contrast like this, then it will give you the good score, and it will be accessible for the people who is having some color contrast issue. So in this way we can actually set the color contrast issue. And there are some other tools to check the color contrast issue, which is this one. So you can define your color here and you can check each of them. Like if you are set this one as a background and this is the text, so for this background, which text color will be good? So you can check the score for this color, or for this background, which color is good. For this color, this color is good enough. So you can check these things, or you can put your site color code here, both text and background, and it will show you the result. It will give you the result. Let's move into the next part, which is handling the dynamic content. So when you are having some pagination, so in that case, if you want your user to show the content without reloading the page, then it needs to be informed that user, like for the new content. For example, if you are having some product, e-commerce product, and there is an add to cart, and when you click on that cart, there are some Ajax functionality happen. So when the product is added to the cart, then you need to inform your user, hey, this product is added to the cart. So these type of things you must need to inform your user. Or if you load more content without reloading the page by clicking the load more post button, then add you need to add some text, or you need to inform your user to for the new content, I can say. Yeah, dynamic content. So if anything is updated, then you can actually use effect tool to update the content, or to inform the user like, hey, these things are updated. Then you can definitely check the new content. And the main thing is actually don't leave user confused. Like if they press any button, but they didn't actually know how actually what is the next result by clicking on this button. So you need to inform your user. Don't leave the user confused. And then screen reader text. Before I explain the screen reader text, then I must come into here, which is like this one. The entire card is clickable, but here I actually add some thing in here like read more about these things. So it is not about the title, but when the user come into here with some proper voiceover tool, then they must actually read these things, like read more about the ancient template, Steward and Testament, something like that. So in this case, if you are not having this sort of things like area label, then you should add, or you should use screen reader text, something like when user click on this, or when user come to this section, then they must know like what is the main purpose of this section, and or what is the main thing of this card block. When you like, if I click on this card, or if I press enter, then what things it what will be the next thing if I press enter, or press or if I click in here. So in these things, in this way, we can actually add some alternative text in this context. The next thing is actually having some accessibility in your AI workflow. I can say, yeah. There are some by default AI tools in your Chrome. For example, if in this article, if I right click and ask AI, this is the default Chrome feature. I can say, yeah, I can ask anything in these Chrome Dev Tools, ask AI. So if I run something like audit this markup for accessibility and press enter, it will analyze the things and tell you what is the issue, what is the good, and what is the bad, and how can I use area label by. So it will add some text and some suggestion like what can be the next things you can ask, like check color contrast of the text and background. And if I click on here, send the things, check the color contrast of the text and background, and it will give you the right things, or if it will give you the right suggestion. And in this way, we can use AI tools by default. Definitely the ChatGPT, the Claude is there, but this is the Chrome Dev Tools. We can use that for the more accessibility. In this case, I must say this is something like good to know, some sort of like if you are having some ambiguous text, like read more. For example, for the site categories, if I add some read more button in here, that counts as a actually ambiguous text. Like when user comes into that, then screen reader text will read about like read more. But the thing is that read more about what? Read more about what? Like if I add read more in here, and here. So each time screen reader comes into here and read more, read more. But the thing is that, like, read more about what? So you need to add some more context in that read more, like read more about this, read more about this, read more about this. So in this way you can add some actually fix some ambiguous text. Empty button. Empty button is something like the most common example of empty button, which is hamburger menu. So in this case, you can add some screen reader text like what is the main purpose of this button, so that user can know. And the iframe button. Iframe, if any iframe is not having any title, then you can add some title, or you can have some area label, so that user can know like this area is actually responsible for these things, and which is having some user can have some good idea. And the next thing is incorrect heading order. So few of the people, like, if I having some, if I set these things as a H3, for example, if I develop some block which is having by default H3, but by default there is H1. So when the browser is parsing that text, then at first it will have H1 and then H3. In between there is no text. So you need to have some chronicle order. And empty link, if you having some empty link, at least you actually have some screen reader text. And if you are having any link that is open in a new tab, then you should add a area label like opens in a new tab. This is something like good to know and good to implement. Now it's time to testing. So at first, we can go through the gist. If I open the dev tool, I set testing environment here. So if I open npm run just as a coverage, I write some text regarding some, yeah, here it is. So I write some test case regarding a edit.js of featured block. So in this case, actually, there are some functionality needed. There are some mocking related things. You must test, you must write some tests um, regarding your functionality. Like all of the things are actually not available in the testing purpose, but even in that case you need to mock those things. So this is not part of the accessibility, but it is good to have, good to write some actually writing some test case regarding your accessible things. So in this case I write some coverage, which is render without crashing, event handler, toggle control. This is something like you can write. And the next part is playwright, so which is the most important part. So I write one playwright test regarding the feature post. So here it is, test end to end and featured post. So what it does, I can say, what it does, it will create a page, then insert the featured post, then save the page, and then on the front end it will go through the navigation through the keyboard. If the keyboard navigation is working, then it will pass the test. Otherwise it will fail. So let's run the test. Here it is. So At first, I should say npx, then playwright, then test. Of course, the testing environment is needed to be set, but I can say that is the different context. So I just wanted to test the accessible test, like if when the block is inserted, then it will go through the navigation and go through the tab navigation or not. Like if I run into this test, it will open a new pop-up and go through one by one. It will open a new pop-up, log into my dashboard, create a page, search for the featured post, insert into the block, save the post, copy the page URL, and then log in. And then see, I didn't did anything, but it is actually going through the tab and navigate through the link by link. So if everything, it is actually go through the post, and then at last it will delete the page. So see, all the things are actually passed. So in this way, we can actually test the tab functionality of your block. So Playwright is actually having the good tool, so you can use this way to test your tab functionality or keyboard functionality, I can say. Yeah, that is the Playwright testing thing. And some sort of like other tools which is available, like Chrome DevTools, I can say. In the Chrome DevTools, open the Chrome DevTools Lighthouse. I can choose desktop or mobile. I can choose accessibility, analyze the page load. So it will give you the good accessibility test. So if you are having some issue, then it will show you like what is the main things of your accessibility. The next thing can be ACE, Xstep tools, screen readers, and keyboard only testing. So you can also use the accessibility things by default coming from Mac. You can use that things, but yeah, these are the tools you can use. Yeah, that's it for this session. If you have any question, let me know. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anam, for that really great presentation. And just a reminder to everybody that if you'd like to ask anything of Anam, he is right here and available just for the next few minutes. So you can write your questions in the Q&A section. So I have got a question here, Anam, if you're available. The first one is that David said that he noticed you have GraphQL installed on your WordPress site. Could you tell us a little bit about what you use it for?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for asking this question. Actually, GraphQL is not for the accessibility, but you can use it for creating your post. It will open some, I can say, it will open some post-related stuff. So when you are creating your own blog, you can fetch those. You can fetch those posts using the GraphQL. I use GraphQL for headless WordPress mostly, but GraphQL is not the part of this part. So I installed the WordPress default GraphQL plugin for my own learning purpose, but that is the another things.
Okay, great. And David has another question as well. What resources can you suggest to learn how to create your own Gutenberg blocks?
Okay, so by default, WordPress provide few of the things like blog related resource. I can say the developer wordpress.org, there is a blog editor resource is there, and there are some good GitHub example is there. So you can check those GitHub repo for learning the Gutenberg related stuff. And WordPress have good documentation regarding the Gutenberg related stuff. So that is the best part, I can say, and to getting started for the Gutenberg development.
Okay. And can you give some details on that testing tool that you were using, Anis is asking?
Okay, thanks for asking. At first, you need to set some testing environment, I can say. So regarding the visual related stuff, WordPress suggests Playwright, and WordPress have good documentation regarding the Playwright. So you can follow those steps in the WordPress documentation you have those link, so set those up. But the things I write it, which is like tab related functionality, so you can write it manually regarding your own based on your own development. So when the things are actually in the development process, then you can set either it is tab. So if you can wanted to press the link or press the enter or space, then you can choose your functionality like that way. But before that, you need to set the playwright environment.
Okay. There's quite a few people actually asking about your tools, and they were in the chat as well, including the AI from the Chrome Dev Tools. Have you got any examples of when you've used that AI? Have you found it useful in that way?
Before using AI, I always suggest you know it, because if you are asking AI regarding some area roles, just actually learn about AI. Sorry, learn about the area roles, because not every time AI give you the best result for you, because the purpose you need it, but AI sometimes gives you the different results. So before you take example or take answer from AI, at first learn it yourself, because if you are not having any experience, then you might not get the right answer from the AI also. So if I get confused with AI, I also use some of the I can say the MDN resource like Mozilla resource. So I use those things as my personal learning. But when I got those things, I got to know from my experience. Then I use the ChatGPT or Claude for the more details use case. But if I'm on development process, then Google Chrome Dev Tools like Google AI comes into play for most of the cases.
Okay. So is it possible for you to perhaps make a list of some of the tools that you were using in your demonstration today, and then perhaps we can have them available for people afterwards once the video is released?
Okay, sure, definitely.
That'd be great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending the session with Anam Hussain. You can continue your conversation in chat for a wee while or on social media using the hashtag WPA11YDAY. Another hashtag is WPAD2025. And we'd also appreciate it if you could go to the URL 2025.wpaccessibility.day/feedback. And then you can provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. And you can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. Stay tuned for the next session, which is Real Inclusion, how to run insightful and respectful user testing with disabled people. That's coming up with Lucy Collins at 7 a.m. UTC time. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. Thank you again, Anam, and I'll see you guys right here after the break.
Yeah, thank you so much.